Good.
I'm
Just
ready to get
introduce
started.
you. Yeah, sweet.
Sure.
All right. Cool. Well, welcome Jason Dorland to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought we would just start off and talk a little bit about your high performance journey, where you started, where you've ended up, and what you've learned along the way.
Wow.
Big
That's a
question.
big that's a big question.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I think like so many athletes, the dream, the suggestion begins uh, at a young age, and for me, I was no different. So, as a young boy, grew up in an athletic family and had an athletic dad. Um, sports was a big component of our lives, and growing up at a school in southern Ontario where sport was a huge component of the education. So we were very fortunate enough to attend Ridley College, which is in St. Catharines, Ontario, and our dad was a teacher and a coach there, and so we were afforded that education as children of a teacher. And sport, like I said, was a big component. We involved ourselves in all kinds. And but then as we got older, rowing became the focus. Ridley was fortunate enough to have a rowing and a coaching legend as their head coach, Neil Campbell, who was a multiple Olympian, coached the Canadian men in 1984 to an Olympic gold medal and an Olympic course record, Order of Canada. So he's quite literally, an international legend when it comes to rowing and coaching. And so having him as a coach as a young boy, wow, in so many ways, what a gift, right? What an opportunity. And so my brothers and then myself, I was the youngest of four, certainly jumped into that opportunity. And for me, big time. It certainly became a dream, right? Certainly to row for Neil at the high school level, and then upon graduating from Ridley, to come back and row for him on the national team. And then when Canada won the gold in '84, that really sort of sealed the deal for me in terms of wanting to come back or wanted to make the Canadian national men's eight and represent Canada at the next Olympic Games, which were in Seoul, South Korea. And so, that's what I did. I was about 20 years old when they won in 1984, and for the next 4 years, making that boat and getting to the Olympics was really my focus. So, yeah, it was it was an intense journey. And the lessons were many. And in many ways, the lessons kept rolling well after the 1988 Olympics.
How
So I'm not
so?
sure where you want to go from there. Sorry?
Yeah, how so? I mean, I'm familiar with the story of
Sure.
how you guys, I believe you guys came dead last in that
We did.
event in in
Right.
'88. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, one could assume that that would be devastating, right? You've worked your life for this and you spent 4 years training probably harder than you've ever trained before, and you get there and you get dead last. But you say that there's several lessons there. So what were those lessons?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And I think, since obviously since that event, meeting people who say, yeah, but you got to go to the Olympics. And I totally get that. Right. But I think what made it perhaps a little more challenging was that as defending champions, um, having members of the crew from '84 in our boat and a fair bit of hype, and certainly having the uh, the manpower and the speed to defend that Olympic gold medal, and then to not do it, given the pressure and the expectation. I think as a young athlete, that's really what ramped it up. So, sixth in the world, I guess in the grand scheme of things, not so bad, but compared to what we were expecting, it was not the desired outcome, right? And certainly for the person I was at the time, as a young, 24, 25-year-old, that was not what I, it's not what I went there to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, coming home and then reading the article, seeing the photographs in the paper, that was a part of the journey that I really, although I suppose I knew that was going to happen, I guess I didn't expect it to be as personal, right? When you're a young kid, and I was a young kid. I mean, 24, you're given the bubble that I had existed in terms of being a high performance athlete. I was still very young. And so when you see a picture of yourself on the front of the national sports section and you read about yourself in a way that we were written, or how the race was described, that's kind of a moment, right? And so, it wasn't just that we had gone to the Olympics and failed in terms of what the expectations were. It was how that failure was shared in such a public and, I'm going to say, a demeaning and shameful way. Um, so, you know, from there, it really became about trying to manage with what I meant, what I made losing mean, right? So it really became a story that I sort of wrote in my head around. Um, so I went to the Olympics, I lost in the final, and so that makes me an Olympic loser. And so that Olympic loser title, self-prescribed, became really a something that and I don't think battled is too dramatic. I really struggled with that for a long time, and it was self-imposed. And that's the crazy part of it, right? Is that so much of the struggles that I went through were of my own doing. But I think at the time, late 1980s, early 1990s, it was a time where we didn't talk about stuff, right? And what I was going through, the challenges that I was experiencing, there was no culture at the time where people could speak safely. At least I didn't think so,
Mm-hmm.
about what I was feeling. And I think that compounded a lot of it, was that um, I didn't know what I was going through was sort of quote unquote normal. I didn't understand that that's how people come out of big life experiences, having not achieved what they wanted to, and then gone through a transition out of sport, and then being left to feel the way I was feeling. I mean, now we even have a term for it, right? Athlete transition. There was no sense that transitioning from sport is going to take you through some emotional experiences, and they are normal.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like not only was I struggling, but I was the first person in the world to ever struggle with this. And so that made it even worse, because I thought there was something wrong with me. Um, yeah, but goodness, it was a long journey, and it had all the, sort of the boxes ticked of depression and anxiety, and an eating disorder, obsessive compulsive behavior, all of that sort of stuff. Fortunate for me, the two areas I avoided was addiction and suicide, which, sadly are common. And, but, I was able to, at eventually meet the right people and start to uh, have a really good look at what had gone wrong in soul, and and the effects of that, and how I was going to move forward. right? And it wasn't until I started to do that, sort of deep dive, if you will, into where I was at the time, that I began to sort of bottom out and start to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And that took, you know, I'm going to say 5-6 years before things started to turn around, as it were.
Really,
So,
eh?
yeah, and that's a long time. I mean, that's crazy when I think of just saying that. I think, oh God,
Yeah.
so unnecessary. But it's what happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I recently watched Michael Phelps's new documentary, The Weight of Gold, right? And even somebody who won as many gold medals as he did is being very open about the depression that comes afterwards, right? Where your identity is so tied to that event or those Olympics that once they're over, it's kind of like, what is the meaning in your life now? So it's interesting to hear it from the other side where you're not winning versus winning, and it's kind of the same thing. So um, I guess nowadays it sounds like people are talking about it more, and there is support systems in place, like My Game Plan, I believe, is something that Canadians can go through and be supported afterwards, right?
Right.
um, yeah, I guess, how do you coach someone into that identity portion to make sure that they come out of it, whether they win or lose, a better person?
Right. And that's and that is the question, right? That
Yeah.
is the challenge. And, as much as game plan is an important component of athlete transition, it's really just a catch net. So, our work is about front loading it so that the athletes go through their entire athletic career, including world championships, Olympics, what have you, or professionally, or not even university, depending on the level they get to. Um, and then are able to transition out of sport without the road bumps of what I and many others did. And in Michael's instance, we use that as a shining example, right? I think, what was it, 18 Olympic gold medals? So what is the argument that if he had won 19, then that would have sort of been okay? But and that shows up in the research all the time, that when Olympic gold medalists wake up the morning after having won, there is a realization that how they thought they would feel, what they believed the Olympic gold medal would bring them, isn't realized. And they wake up as the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes the challenge, right? Is that, well, hold on a second. I was led to believe that an Olympic gold medal is the pinnacle of achievement, and that will be a life-changing moment. And certainly it can be, and it does for many, right? But it doesn't change who we are as people. And I think so much of athletes' Olympic journey can be about an egoic chase, right? So, for example, for me as a young boy, a young man, certainly on the national team, my belief was that if I won an Olympic gold medal, I would be complete, right? That'd be it. I'd be done. I'd be good to go. So any shortcomings that I may have felt leading into that Olympic final would have been cleared or wiped away, because, hey, you can't win anything bigger than this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm not alone. There are many Olympians who maybe not would be willing to talk about that, or certainly admit, but there's an underlying belief that 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 getting to that place of winning an Olympic gold medal will be a game changer. And when it's not, it's they sort of hang on, and then they go again and they try again, and that identity piece becomes more and more challenging to break out of, because they have created this world where who they are is what they do. So as a young man, who I was, who I saw myself as, was an Olympic athlete while I was training, right? And so the plan was then to evolve that to an Olympic champion.
Mhm.
And so when that didn't happen, it was replaced with, well, then you're an Olympic loser because everybody knows you came sixth. But truthfully, not everybody I met knew that I came sixth, but that's what I believed. I believed everybody saw me through that lens of, wow, this guy lost at the Olympics when he was supposed to win. Yikes, what the hell's his problem? So when you're in that insecure place and those are the stories you're spinning, it can be a really challenging gig. And it was for me, and it was for so many. But you know, in the work that we do now, what we try to encourage coaches and athletes to understand is that it doesn't have to be that way, right? It doesn't have to be about ego. And in fact, when we move it out of that egoic realm, not only do we become better athletes or better performers, but we just become healthier people.
Can you describe a little bit more, just in your definition, what ego is and why it gets in our way as
Yeah,
athletes and performers?
right. And I think so often ego is held in this negative space that it's
Mm-hmm.
something, it's a part of us that's broken, right? We should avoid ego. You know, ego isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? We all have an ego, but it you know, it lives in our head, and it always wants to be right, and it likes to tell stories, and often it sort of drives the bus, and I think that's where we get ourselves into trouble. Excuse me. It's certainly where I got myself into trouble when I allowed those stories to be my operating system. You know, that's when things got destructive. So when we start to, you know, for example, believing that I would be complete, believing that my ego would be happy or satisfied with an Olympic gold medal was an interference, right? That got in my way in my ability to perform, because when you are in that chase mode, when all you think about is the notion of winning, or the flip side of that, not losing, when the focus is to not lose, that's an interference. That the emotion of that is counter to a flow state which supports high performance. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, paradoxically, when we feel free to fail, when failing is okay, we are more free to perform at a highest level and win. So, and that's the part that sport has a hard time with,
Mm-hmm.
because so much of our culture sees losing as weak, and sees not having a winning goal as being weak as well. So when I started coaching after the Olympics, and I came back with this different approach, that our goal was not going to be to win, but instead the goal was going to be to show up on race day and perform to the best of our ability. And if we won, you know, rah rah, terrific. Um, that that became a strategy, and I began to realize that this isn't just some warm and fuzzy approach to making sure kids are okay with losing. This is actually a strategy for high performance, because when we create a safe container for individuals, and it doesn't just have to be athletes, it can be people at work, it can be anywhere. When people exist in a culture where they feel safe to screw up, they screw up less often, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when the pressure is there to not fail, that pressure creates stress, creates interferences that then encourages or results in more failure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the crazy part of the current paradigm of high performance, is that, well, if you lose, you're a loser. And if you don't focus on winning, then you're weak. So we have all these egoic stories of what toughness is and what bravado is, and the machismo of the male paradigm, this combative approach to high performance. And we love it because it's a good story, right? It puts bums in seats. People love the notion of the battle in sport. And it's as old as, it's old.
Mm-hmm.
But when you really look at it from a scientific perspective and you start to analyze and break down the stories that we hold on to, you start to realize that the way we hold sport is a huge interference in the ability of trying to produce high performing athletes. And that's a big thing to encourage coaches to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
To look outside of the way they've always coached and ask themselves, wow, am I creating a culture that supports high performance and, more importantly, supports the healthy development of young athletes?
So why does that mindset kind of create an interference, and why would it get in the way of somebody performing to their potential?
Well, because the fear of losing, the fear of failure, expresses itself as a stress hormone. We release hormones in our body, chemicals that inhibit performance physiologically.
Mm.
And the opposite of that is that when we feel safe to perform, when we know that our sense of self will not be judged or influenced based on the outcome of our performance, i.e., you're a loser or way to go, you're a champion, then that sort of external pressure is not given the opportunity to screw things up, right? So showing up in our Olympic final, my young self was not only concerned with winning the Olympic gold medal, but not losing, right? Because we were defending Olympic champions, and so that's an expectation as well, right? And in order to defend the Olympic gold medal, you can't lose. So the fear of losing impedes the ability to be in a state of flow, which supports high performance. So if I could go back there and do it again, I wouldn't necessarily change the physical components of our training and preparation and the boat and all that sort of stuff. I would more change who I was in that moment, what I believed about myself and the outcome of that race. And quite frankly, my reason for being in that Olympic gold medal race. So my reason for being there was all egoic, right? It was, well, this is about me. I mean, once I've won an Olympic gold medal, then I'm a rock star.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've learned as a coach since falling down as hard as I did is that that approach, that fuel, is an interference to high performance. So I would have preferred to have gone back to that race just because I love rowing, just because the notion of being an Olympic gold medal final event is it's a gift, man. Like, I'm sorry, but not too many people get to sit in this seat and race the best in the world. Consider yourself fortunate.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going to do? Just go out there and show yourself what you're capable of. Like, that's the headspace I would have preferred to be in, where I saw it as an exciting opportunity to just go out there and have fun racing because I loved racing. If I had been in that headspace, I'm not saying we would have won, but I likely would have had a better performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like there's a in my opinion, it always comes down to your motivations, right? And how you're motivated. And it's almost like there's a healthy way and an unhealthy way to be motivated. Um, like I always kind of come back to The Last Dance, that Michael Jordan
Right.
documentary, right? And he used hate basically as his fuel, right? And I can't help but wonder the contradiction there, because he was a champion, right? But do you think that there'd be more long-term effects where maybe he wasn't as fulfilled as he could have been had he had a healthier, like, I don't even know if that's the right way to go about it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what's your take on that?
Yeah, I totally get that. And it's interesting. I wrote a blog on that series,
Yeah.
and I was really struck by how many people resonated with what I saw to be my experience of watching it too. And look, I would never argue that the combative model doesn't work. It does. I used it. I mean, it got me to an Olympic final, right? I hated my competitors. I saw racing as a battle. It was about a war. And, you know, yeah, it was about killing anyone who showed up beside you, right? That was how I held racing. And clearly, Michael did too, right?
Mm.
That was the way that you inspire fuel, by creating this anger, this intense desire to destroy anyone who tries to get in the way of what you want. And I would never argue it doesn't work, because it does. What I would argue is that it's incredibly destructive, and that it's expensive. It's expensive fuel, because the price of hate, um, as far as I'm concerned, is expressed in two levels. So in the personal experience, and I would agree with you that you look at Michael in the interviews today, and maybe it's just me, but he doesn't strike me as a happy soul.
Mhm.
To me, I still perceive a bit of an edge, and I wonder, for a guy who accomplished what he did, he still doesn't feel to me that he's at peace with his career as an athlete. And I just kind of think, holy crap. I mean, many people would describe you as one of the best, if not the best, athletes who's ever stepped on a basketball court.
Mhm.
And on some level, it seems to me like you don't seem like you're that you're okay with how things ended, like there was more that you could have done, or something like that. Okay,
Mhm.
so on a personal level, when we use hatred as a motive, as a fuel, as a way to motivate ourselves, it's an intense fuel, and it can work really quickly in the moment. But part of the challenge with that fuel is that every time you go to that source, every time you pull out the hate card, it's got to be bigger, right? It has to be able to drum up the same amount of fuel, or more than it did the last time. So what I found was that before each of my race, when I went through my usual internal process of turning up that hatred, and really and developing that rage and anger towards my competitors, every time I did that, it required more effort. So it required me having to um, uh, just having to go deeper and build up more of that anger to garner the same effect. Okay, so that became an expensive price. The energy involved in that was immense. And then the second component, and this is a big picture piece. This is when you step back and you look at the culture of sport, and what is the purpose of sport. And for me, I kind of think, the last thing we need in the world right now is more hatred.
Mm.
And I'm sorry, but if sport is going to remain um, an important part of our society, then it needs to find a bigger purpose. If it's just there to distract us and entertain us, then it can continue along and all that sort of stuff, and it works, and I get it, right? I get it. But what I find exciting about sport is that if it were to step into the realm where sport becomes something bigger than just being a distraction and just being entertaining, that's where sport steps into the possibility of affecting societal change, right? And we all talk about the power of sport to influence the good in the world, but that's not always the case. I just don't. We're seeing some of it now with Black Lives Matter, and with more social awareness coming into the sport, and that's awesome. When sport offers itself as a platform to raise awareness, I'm all over it. That's great. Mm-hmm. But I just don't think you can't have it both ways. You can't make sport an expression of hatred and war and killing in the name of winning something, and then in the same instance want to inspire youth to care about one another, to broaden their minds in terms of social awareness. I just think it's one or the other. And again, this is the challenging part for so many coaches, is that, for me, love became a huge component of how I coached in the years following the Olympics. I used to encourage the boys that I worked with I used to tell them, look, we're going to build a culture of love on this team. And, as you can well imagine, 16, 17, 18-year-old boys would, what is this guy talking about? Right?
Yeah, no kidding.
I came here to win a gold medal. I didn't come here to love another teenage boy.
Yeah.
And, but when they finally realized that love, it wasn't an emoji, right? It wasn't the way Western culture anyhow has really kind of changed the word love to make it mean something that it really isn't. I see love as a deep valuing, a deep connection with other people, not a surface love. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where it's an experience between two people on a deep level, not romantic love, right? And so when you encourage that kind of culture, where people care enough about each other that they're willing to push themselves to race truly for one another, that's when we step into a pretty cool place of opportunity. So, when we talk about fuel, one of the reasons why I believe the coaches or the crews that I worked with were so successful, it wasn't necessarily the way we trained or our technique or anything like that. It was really that culture, that I had a pretty good understanding that when the crews that I worked with backed into the starting gates of a race, I could almost guarantee that their why, their reason for racing, was bigger than any of the other crews. They weren't just there to try and win a race. They were there for each other. Mm-hmm. And that's a powerful source of fuel.
Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of makes me think of just instilling intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, where it's not about what you achieve, it's about the process, right? And I find that that's such a tough concept to break down and make people understand, especially quickly. Like, do you have any way of I guess describing to somebody how to enjoy the process rather than become desired outcomes? Like, I think of not only sport but business is very along those routes, where I think like, I'm an entrepreneur, right? And I've been an entrepreneur for 4 or 5 years. And I remember at the very beginning, it was about getting rich, you know, it was outcome oriented, and that's
Right.
what I wanted. And I found that it just burned me out, you know,
Sure.
whereas now I'm trying to develop something where it's deeper than that. And it means something intrinsic, where I'm just doing something for the sake of it being unique to me. Right. And that I find is a lot more sustaining. But yeah, could you talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
I mean,
that?
Jeremy, you're touching on so many important components, right? In terms of that notion of intrinsic, extrinsic, in terms of its ability to motivate. And extrinsic motivators can work, and they do work. I mean, the notion of getting rich is a powerful attraction, and business people have used that as a source of fuel for, forever,
Mm-hmm.
right? For as long as there's been economy, people have used money as a desire, as a reason to get up out every morning and work and drive their business. What 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 we would argue, and what science would argue, is that, as you have experienced, when that becomes your sole purpose, it can start to lose its attraction, right? It can sort of go, oh God, I need a bigger reason to get out of bed than just make money. Because again, back to the Olympic gold medal, even once you start to make that money, you realize, well, this isn't really changing my life. Okay, yeah, I'm buying lots of crap, but it doesn't make me feel any different. So when people start to have that realization that, yes, I now have this fancy car, I live in a bigger home, I have no worries financially, and those are all wonderful things, but on an inner level, I still feel the same. I still have a desire to want to feel different, to want to feel better, perhaps even. And that's where we come back to that notion of intrinsic motivation. So the idea of doing something because of how it makes me feel inside. So um, when you have an athlete who comes to practice every day because it makes them feel good on an internal level, that makes them want to come back again the next day,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when coaches use sort of carrots and sticks, if you will, so if you come back tomorrow, we're going to, this is how I'm going to entice you into coming back, using a physical or a tangible way to get someone to show up. I mean, that can work. It does. Or on the flip side of that, if you don't come back here tomorrow, this is what will be the repercussion of that. That can work too. But again, it becomes tiresome and we become numb to those types of motivation. But when we show up for work, or when we come to practice, or any endeavor, when just being there and being engaged in the activity makes us feel good, that on an intrinsic level, that's a powerful motivating force.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we step into the realm of service. So what we find, and what we encourage, and what science will tell you, is that one of part of how we are hardwired as human beings is to serve the greater good, right? And so when that becomes part of our reason why, when we are contributing to the life or the betterment of someone else, that's a really powerful experience, right? And it makes us want to do it again. It's like donating to charity. The reason charities exist, and quite frankly, they'd have a hard time existing if we didn't have that innate response that when we contribute to something, we have a sense of fulfillment. We have a sense of, oh, I love the fact that I was able to help someone else out with whatever. GoFundMe campaigns, you name it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that experience can be created in a highly competitive world of business and of sport. So as a coach, I created a culture where athletes were contributing to the lives of one another. By serving their teammates, they had a higher purpose to come to practice every day.
Mm-hmm.
As business people, when we create a culture where employees come to work and they feel like they're there for bigger reasons than just paying a mortgage or paying car payments or rent or food or what have you. And those are all integral parts of having a job. I get it. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But when it becomes about something bigger, that you are contributing on a level that registers on your in your in that intrinsic self, that sense of motivation, you sort of hit a switch that can be a really powerful, and as you mentioned, a really sustainable source of motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool part is that it doesn't diminish; it actually grows. We experience intrinsic motivation in such a way that if we keep coming to it, it can get stronger. It's not like we have to, when we are enticed through carrots. So it's like the research around, if somebody comes to a business owner, a boss, and says, look, I've been offered another job. They're going to pay me more money. So I'm giving my 2 weeks or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the boss thinks to himself, well, geez, we really want this guy to stay. Well, how about if we offer you this much money and a car and what have you? Well, the research shows that within a number of months, that individual has stayed, but then left because they realize that it's not the money as to why they're leaving. It's not because I wanted a car. It's because the culture in which that I'm working now does not fulfill me on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
So as leaders, as business owners, as coaches, when we see the strategy of creating bigger whys in the motivation of the people who either work at our businesses or play on our teams, we tap into a really powerful strategy of high performance. So people come to work and perform at a higher level because it makes them feel good, not because they have to.
Mm-hmm.
Understand the difference?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a nuance, right? So as opposed to, if I don't go to work today, A, I'm not going to earn any money, and B, I might get fired.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, I want to come to work today because when I'm at this place of work, I feel like I'm doing meaningful work. I feel seen. I feel appreciated. I feel like I contribute to something meaningful. When those are the whys that people come to work, those are more powerfully motivating than all of the tangible bits.
Yeah, the carrot and stick thing I find fascinating because yeah, you can motivate somebody by offering a reward and they may want to excel and to achieve that reward, right? But I've dove into the psychology and when it comes to, they call it autonomy support, where you want to make sure that I guess we all have this innate desire to feel in control of our own lives and our own situations, right? So you may not realize it, but as soon as you're trying to achieve a reward that somebody is offering you, you feel as though they're trying to control you. You know, you may not logically think it, but that is a form of them controlling you rather than you having your own agency and just kind of doing your own thing for the sake of your own control, right?
Agreed.
And yeah, I find that fascinating how it's I guess the average untrained coach or parent just intrinsically thinks that a reward is going to be helpful to motivate, right? When really it is destructive. It's just fascinating to me how
Sure,
we
it
get it
truly
backwards.
does. Yeah, it undermines performance.
Yeah.
And again, you come back to what we believe coaching is as a society, right? In my day, um, because I said so, was a
Yeah.
legitimate answer, right? That was okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, right. You know what, God, what was I thinking? Of course, I don't ask those kind of questions.
Hmm.
Um, but today, we have a generation where that's not good enough. They want to know why. Like, well, what do you mean you want us to do this in terms of training? Or, um, so I see that as an exciting shift, especially in the sport world. We're at a place now where where if coaches aren't evolving their practices, they're losing their jobs. And that's how we're going to evolve sport.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you touch on an important part of our coaching. Again, in the work that we do, we really challenge coaches. And when I say coaches, I don't mean just sport. I mean business leaders, government leaders, organizational leaders. How we relate to people, how we connect with them is so integral to that relational foundation of performance. So again, back to the notion of trying to create safety and the notion of autonomy. People love to have a say in their future, as you alluded to. When we feel autonomous, when we feel in control of our future, we are more inclined to show up as high performers, right? Because again, we're not just there because someone told us to be there. And we're not just doing things because somebody told us, well, you better do this or else.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we work with coaches, we encourage that relationship to be something other than just offering feedback or telling somebody what to do. In my day as an athlete, I was told what to do. So, change your technique to be like this, or make sure on this day you're training like this. But what we invite coaches to try on now is to make it about inquiry. So where you involve the athlete in the problem solving, mm-hmm. or you involve the employee in the problem solving, so that they come to the table feeling valued, feeling seen, excuse me, feeling like they have a voice. And when we feel that, again, it turns a switch in terms of our willingness and our wanting to show up and perform. So, that touches on a really key element of leadership, where coaching isn't telling people what to do. It's inviting them to have a say in what they do. And, that's a process, and it's, it isn't just about asking questions. It's about asking really good questions. Mm-hmm. And yeah, but again, it all speaks to the notion of turning on those intrinsic motivators, and autonomy is a key part of that. Service is a key part of that. Mm-hmm. And when coaches, when entrepreneurs, any sort of leader, when they recognize those parts of the human experience, and they make them, and they incorporate them on a strategic level, they will see a shift in the performance of their teams. Guaranteed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, something just clicked for me there, where from the coach's perspective, there's almost a difference. There's almost ego there involved with the leader as well, whether you're a coach or just a leader of a business or a manager or a parent, because to a certain extent, leading properly takes more energy and takes more time. Asking those good questions, like you say, takes more time. So if you as a leader are coming from a selfish point of view, where you just want to be seen as this good leader, and your ego is just being filled by being a winning coach or whatever, then you're going to try and do it the least amount possible, right? Whereas if you come from a value set of, I want to really create this culture, then I think you would be more motivated to spend that time and work a little bit harder to get to know how that specific individual may need to be led,
It's excellent. Yeah, I totally agree. And that was, for me, really that shift, where in my first iteration as a young coach after the Olympics, holy smokes, it was a frightening, it was a frightening place, because I saw my athletes as an extension of me. When they win, I win.
Yeah.
So it was all an egoic experience. So I drove them because I wanted to be seen as worthy. And there were some unhealthy moments in my coaching, that I am not proud of whatsoever. Did we win some races and national championships? Sure, yeah, you bet we did. But I'm not okay with how I got there. When I finally understood that coaching was about the service of other people, when I held coaching as an opportunity to change the lives of the athletes that I was working with for the better, then everything changed, because I stopped seeing sport through my ego, right? When I realized, Jace, this is not about you, my friend. This is about the athletes who show up and agree to work with you. When that moment happened, everything changed for me. When I realized that I was in the service of my athletes, everything changed, including my winning record, right? Mm-hmm. And again, back to the paradox. When I stopped trying to win, we won more often. Because in trying to change the lives of these athletes, what happened was we created healthier, higher performing athletes. And they were able to go on and have remarkable performances. Mm-hmm. Because I was there to support them. So I was not in the way of that, right? Mm-hmm. And science will tell you that makes sense, right? That wasn't something I stumbled upon. Well, I mean, I stumbled upon it through my own journey, but now that I know more about it, science explains to me, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And this is why, Jace, like, it's not like you just invented this new way of coaching. The reason that approach works is because of who we are as human beings. Mm-hmm. What triggers our source of motivation in this instance, right? Yeah. Our reason for wanting to come to practice every day. So mm-hmm. what I tried to do is create a safe place where athletes showed up every day, and at the end of the practice, they left feeling better about themselves. So I knew if I could do that every day, I'd have some pretty keen athletes coming to practice because they just love being at practice. Now, did we work any less? No, not at all. And that's, again, the other misnomer, is that in order to create this attractive environment for athletes to want to come, you can't push them as hard. I disagree. In fact, the last crew that I worked with when I went back to coach at Ridley, the group that I had 2014, if I were to go back and look at the workload of that crew, the mileage that they put in, it would be on par with the work that I did in the lead up to the Olympics. So the volume of work that those boys were doing as teenage boys was pretty high. And they trained really hard. But I believe the reason they trained really hard was because they loved being in that group. They loved who they were training with. Mm-hmm. And they saw their reason as bigger than just winning something, right? They didn't, sure, they wanted to be national championships. I get it. But that wasn't their sole purpose. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I believe we created a higher performing culture.
Cool. That's really profound. I like it. Can you tell me a little bit about your love score?
Sure. Yeah. This notion of a love score, again, you look to the science of that and the research behind it. And although I came to these categories on my own, now through the work that we've done, they all kind of line up with research. So the notion of a love score is, we make it a score. And when I say we all this time, I'm referring to my wife, her name is Robin Marr. And, she was an international middle distance runner. She ran for Canada on the world stage for 17 years, multiple Olympian, top 10 world ranking consistently, and just a phenomenal athlete. And
Wow.
she was really the reason that I had this profound shift in my approach to sport, to high performance. When I met Robin after I retired, I met this athlete that was everything I wasn't. She ran because she loved running. And she didn't need running to, or she didn't need winning in order to feel good about herself. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I, on the other hand, I did. And so, so back to this score, the first score in this category of 4 categories is love for self. How do you value yourself, your self-worth? And, for athletes, it's often a low score because, I always say some of the most, oh goodness, what's the term I want? Some of the most insecure people you'd ever want to meet are high performing athletes, because so much of their identity, of their self-worth, is wrapped up in their performance, right? So for me, when I was a young athlete, I was good enough if my coach told me I was.
Mm-hmm.
So my worth was wrapped up in someone else's opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So if I performed well at practice, I performed well in a race, and a coach said, good race, or that was well done, then my self-worth, my love for self, was a higher number. Part of the reason I struggled so much after Seoul was that my self-worth, holy smokes, I mean, it was in the basement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because not only did did I recognize that we hadn't done well, but the whole nation did, right? So the entire country knew that we hadn't done well because they read it on the front page of that paper. And so my self-worth was held by the country. Mm-hmm. And I interpreted that as being not very good. And so when our love for self is low, how do we change that? We go out and we try to impress those who we respect. Mm-hmm. And so in doing that, it shows up as an interference. Because what are we trying to do? Why are we performing? We're performing in order to feel better about ourselves only if others say that we can feel better about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that becomes counterproductive. Do you understand that?
Yeah, absolutely. Is this a scale of 10 you're using?
It is,
like
yeah, sorry. And I'm going to get to that. So we ask athletes or anyone that we're working with to sort of to scale them, to give themselves a grade, if you will, right? A number out of 10, 10 being best. So they score that out of 10. And, back to the whole notion of this love score, one could argue, and I think most could agree, that the majority of us, certainly in Canada, are born with a perfect score. As children, we have a perfect score, right? We value ourselves. We have no reason not to. And then the other 3 categories, we love, how much do you love what you do, your endeavor? How much do you love who you do it with? And how much do you love those who are competing against you, or as we would like to say, with you? Mm-hmm. So that's a total out of 40. Mm-hmm. And as young children, we score a 40 out of 40 because we have no reason to think otherwise, right? I learned that hating my competitors was a strategy for high performance. So naturally, I always scored a 0 out of 10 on that last category because that's what I was taught. But as young children, we haven't been taught that yet. So as young children, we have a 40 out of 40. So there are no interferences in our notion of play as young children. But as we become athletes, as we start to, if we're going to use sport as the vehicle for this understanding here, as we become athletes and we meet coaches and parents and uncles and teachers and people who we respect, and they tell us, oh, that was good or it wasn't, our score for self, our love for self, continually is in an ebb and flow experience. It is constantly changing based on the opinions of those around us. And that's not a healthy situation. Okay. The second one is love for the endeavor, love for what you're doing. So when we love what we do, we show up differently. So by the time of that Olympic final, I didn't really love rowing anymore. You know, it was there. I was there because of what I wanted out of that Olympic final. I didn't necessarily love rowing anymore, but I loved what I thought it was going to bring me, which was a gold medal. So clearly, when our love for what we do is less than 10, that's problematic, right? One of the reasons Robin was so successful as a middle distance runner was because she loved the way running made her feel. So 10 out of 10. I go to practice because when I run, I feel good. Makes me feel good about myself. That's a powerful driving force. Love for who we do it with. Again, back to the notion of service. You know, if I'm going to use soul as an example, by the time I got into that Olympic final, the love I had for my teammates, I don't know, maybe a 6, maybe a 7 on a good day. I was there for myself, not for my teammates. I wasn't racing for them as much as I was for myself. So when I coached, I tried to get that number as close to a 10 as possible, because I knew that if those boys backed into the gates and they were racing for each other, that was a powerful way to race. So, yeah, that's, you know, when who you do it with makes you feel good, makes you love what you do, again, really powerful motivation. And then finally, who you compete against, which was how I used to hold it, or who you compete with, which is how we hold it now. So when I sat in those starting gates and I went through my usual process of building up hatred for those on either side of me, that's an interference, right? Because I'm thinking about people, I'm thinking about a part of the race that I have no control over, the people I'm racing against, instead of focusing on what I'm supposed to be focusing on, which is my contribution to the race. So instead of being focused on my task, I'm focused on my competitors. Major interference. So part of the reason why we like to use the term with, you compete with your competitors, is that taps into the realm of synergy. And synergy is about creating a larger force when you combine two forces. So the way I raced was against. So one pushing against the other, a counter force. But when you race with someone, you combine the efforts and you create a more powerful force. So when I used to coach the athletes, I would always say, you always wish the best race for your competitors, because it's from their best performance that you will find your best performance, right? In my day, I just was not there. That was not my mindset, right? If someone had said, look, you should wish well upon you, I would have just, you know, what are you talking about? That's not what I know.
Yeah, you almost probably thought that it would make you weaker.
You betcha. Oh,
Yeah.
undoubtedly, I would see that as a weak approach. That would be unmanly, on everything. I would never entertain that way of performing. But now I understand differently. I understand better. I mean, the whole craziness here is that the Latin root word of competitor is competire, which actually means to strive together. So competition is based on synergy, but in Western culture, we have bastardized the term to be about war, to be about battle. And in doing so, we have compromised our ability to perform. But we've also created a culture in sport that can be really destructive, right? All because of our egoic pursuits. Like, you know, media loves to hold sport as a battle. I mean, goodness, just turn on turn on the news, turn on any professional sport, and you'll hear that jargon, right? You'll hear the language of battle, of war, but to the detriment of sport. And so when you invite athletes to see sport, to hold competition differently, you invite them into a higher possibility, because they're not so wrapped up in trying to knock the bejesus out of anybody they're competing against, right? They're focused on themselves. So I really tried to break down those old stories where athletes were new to our program and came in with these old paradigms of sport as a war. I invited them to try and think otherwise. And when they began to experience that, okay, yeah, I get it. This is stupid. Why did I ever think that way? When they were able to step into that world, they became better athletes, and they became better people. And they didn't see their competitors as the enemy. They just saw them as other people. Because I used to say to them, well, if those guys were on your team, you wouldn't hold them the way you do when you see them as the enemy. They're just teenage boys, just like you. But they go to a different school. It doesn't make them bad people, right? And if you were at that school, they'd likely be your friend because you have things in common. But as coaches, we don't necessarily like that narrative because we see it as weak, right? We see it as creating a situation that won't support the athletes, but the opposite is true. So back to the love score. Each of those scores are out of 10. The combined score is out of 40. So when you combine those scores, so if I'm going to go back to the Olympics, my combined score on the morning of the Olympics was a 23 out of 40, about, okay? So let's say that we could take that score and have it show up in a physical representation of that sport, okay? So 23 out of 40. That means almost 50%. I just before the starting gun went off, I was already at a less than my optimal self because of my emotional state. So if we could represent that in a physical manifestation of that score. So let's say that my breathing was restricted to represent my score. So almost 50% of my breathing was restricted, okay? So I'm almost just using half a lung. Okay, let's say I'm using half of my lung capacity because of the story I had in my head. Do you think most coaches would try and change that? I mean, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Of course they would.
Yeah.
But we don't see it that way. We see that as actually, it's just a story, right? It's just emotion. And the more revved up and charged and full of hate you are, the more ready you are to perform. But that's not true. Our emotional state is what we perform, is how we perform through. So who we are in the moment of performance influences our performance. So I see the love score as the gatekeeper. It is what allows performance to come through us. So the performance, all of the training, all of the work, all of my experience, my diet and sleep preparation, all of that were restricted by the emotional state of who I was being in the moment of that Olympic final. Holy crap. Okay. So I get that. So now when I look at it as a strategy, when I see that just by who I showed up as, who I was on the morning of that final, just that very being without taking a stroke was getting in the way of my best performance. When I see it like that, I start to take my emotions more seriously because I think to myself, holy crap, like, bud, you better get a hold of that, because your self-worth how much you love the fact that you're in the starting line, you're on the starting line of an Olympic final, how much you love the other guys that are in that crew, and how much you love the other crews that are lined up here with you, and how much this is a shared experience, and how much you're going to value this someday in your life. All of that is contributing to your ability to perform on a physical level.
Mm-hmm.
But until we see it as such, we miss out on the opportunity of seeing emotion as an important component of high performance, because it's not tangible, right? As humans, we don't see love. It's hard to put a number on it. And so that's why we try to give it a score, to get people to realize, okay, wow, this is something I need to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. And this is the crazy part. In all my years of coaching, in all my years of using the love score with high performing athletes, and these are athletes that have achieved remarkable success, some of them. I've only had one athlete in all that time score higher than a 20 out of 40. Like, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. So these are high performing individuals who have reached an incredible level, and yet they are capable of so much more if only they knew how to tap into that, right? Mm-hmm. But, again, back to our society and what we value. We value hard work. We value the X and O's of performance. We value equipment design. Like, we value all these tangible pieces. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't be bothered with love because, come on, it's love. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with our ability to be an Olympic champion.
Yeah. It's just what they talk about in the movies, kind of thing.
You betcha, right?
Yeah.
But now we know better. Mm-hmm. Right now we know different. And I think, and we experience that things are changing. We experience there is a palpable shift in the young athletes that are coming up in the ranks. And there's a palpable shift in the way coaches are seeing their opportunity as coaches. Mm-hmm. So, back to the lessons of what I've learned. What I've learned is that what happened in Seoul, and it took me a long time to get to this place, but losing in that Olympic final was the greatest gift of my life. Truthfully.
Wow. Yeah.
Because there's just no way on earth I would be where I am today. Not just professionally, but as an individual, mm-hmm. right? I'd be thinking that the Olympic gold medal that my parents have on their wall somewhere is who I am. Mm-hmm. And I'd be lost, right? And I'd still be chasing stuff to think that if I got there, it would make me feel better about myself. Mm-hmm. What I know now is that if we don't feel whole, if we don't feel good about ourselves before we achieve what we are in pursuit of, achieving that pursuit will not make us feel whole. So if we can create that notion of being good enough prior to what it is we're trying to achieve in life, then we are not only more apt to achieve it, but we're able to make it bigger than just the achievement, right? And unfortunately, sometimes you got to get knocked around a little bit in order to come to that place of realization. I wouldn't have come to that realization had I not fallen down as hard as I did. So yeah, were the years after the Olympics challenging? You bet. You bet. Would I wish it upon anyone? Not at all. But those bumps are undoubtedly what taught me what I learned, right? And so now, I use that to try and show athletes a different way so that they don't have to get knocked down like that, so that they can go through sport and through life differently.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because to a certain extent, it's how we learn is through obstacles and having to overcome them ourselves, right? Like
Yep.
even something as simple as eating healthy. I think it takes health problems to be motivated enough to change your habits and actually start eating healthier, you know? So in terms of all of this, how do you instill that into somebody like a young athlete who
Right.
hasn't had those obstacles yet, you know, like hasn't fallen yet?
Right.
Yeah, how do
Yeah.
you get
Great
them to
question.
grasp it?
You bet. Great question. And I think for me, the answer is just around consistency. So, and again, depending on who your listeners are, this may or may not land in a strange way. But for me, it was, I just reminded myself that every day when I went to practice, I had to try and show up as a loving presence. So, what all that means is that when the athletes met my energy, they felt valued, they felt loved, that they didn't have to do anything during practice or during the race in order to feel more loved. They were loved before, during, and after the practice, right? Or the race. And again, back to that notion of self-worth in that initial quarter of the score, right? This love score. Of all of them, of all of the categories, that is the most important category. Because if our love for self is compromised, it spills into every other category, right? It undermines every other category. So that's really the one that coaches have their biggest role to play. And that was a constant struggle for me, because I had a coach who and I loved Neil. Neil has since passed away, but I loved him as a young man, and I still do. Like, I love Neil for what he taught me, for the opportunities he gave me, but the way he conducted himself as a coach was what he knew, right? It's how he was coached. It was, growing up in this John Wayne culture, right? This manly, macho culture. And I'm showing my age a bit there. I hope most people know who John Wayne was. But what I tried to do was to not change who I was when I met my athletes based on how they were doing, right? And that was constant work, because that's what I experienced as an athlete.
Yeah.
When I did something exceptional, people showed up differently to me. My parents, my coaches, my teachers, my friends, family, right? They noticed it. I didn't want my athletes to feel that they had to do something exceptional for me to see them as worthy of my love. It was good enough for them to just be in front of me. And so by consistently showing up as that kind of coach, again, you come back to safety. They felt safe to explore what they were truly capable of, because there was never the fear of screwing up. Mm-hmm. Right? You talk about the notion of these bumps, and I agree. Failure is an integral part of high performance. But part of why failure can be so detrimental is because what we make it mean, what I made it mean. We see failure as bad, right? We came sixth at an Olympic final. That's wrong. That's what I believed. That's bad. We came sixth. When I look at it now, I see it as information. We failed in that Olympic final. And when I look at it now as a coach, I can list a whole bunch of reasons as to why I think we finished sixth. I couldn't do it then, but I can do it now. When we see failure as feedback, when we see failure as opportunity, then we change the way we hold failure. It doesn't mean anything. There is no emotional hit. Do you understand that?
Mm-hmm.
So when failure becomes simply an opportunity to delve into our practice more deeply, our endeavor, then it doesn't have the emotional punch that it has with, otherwise. It doesn't have the sting, the egoic sting, because we don't make it mean much. It just means, okay, clearly I need to change something because it didn't work this time. If you look at any successful entrepreneur, any successful inventor, most successful teams, there was failure along the way because that's how they got better.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And, perhaps aside from Zuckerberg,
Mm-hmm.
people, most successful entrepreneurs have had moments of failure, huge moments of failure, and perhaps his is coming. And if you've seen Social Dilemma, one would guess that it is coming.
Yeah, no kidding.
Um, so, I just think as a society, because of how we've held failure and because of how some of us continue to hold failure, that becomes a huge opportunity to shift, as you use the term mindset, to shift the way we hold failure and just seeing it as opportunity, right? Our expression in our business is there's always opportunity, regardless of the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're able to see failure as opportunity, it doesn't hold us down the way that it can, right? I mean, it got in the way of me coming back and trying again in 92. I attempted a comeback, but because it was so wrapped up in my head that I was an Olympic loser, and by going again in 92, I would prove myself worthy and I would undo what happened in Seoul and all this other garbage, that became an absolute storm in my head, and I just couldn't live in that head anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I retired from the Olympics, or from rowing, in 1990. Now the crazy part of that is that the Canadian men went on and won in 1992.
Wow.
Holy smokes. Like,
Yeah.
you got to know that on that day in 1992, when I heard about them winning, I was furious.
Yeah.
Even though I knew all of the guys in that crew, even though they were my friends, some of them, I was still mad that they had won
Mm-hmm.
because they had something that I didn't have, right? And that's because I was still experiencing life in my ego. If I couldn't have an Olympic gold medal, nobody could have an Olympic gold medal.
It would be
And
hard to interpret that as not that you were a part of the problem
oh,
too.
you betcha. And that's what I made it mean. That was just more fuel for the fire. See,
Yeah.
I told you, you're the
Yeah.
reason they lost,
Yeah.
you
Just
know? And
evidence.
and
Yeah.
when we're in a low place, it doesn't take much to snowball the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an ugly time.
Yeah, no
I
kidding.
mean, I
Well,
can joke about
good.
it now, but holy smokes, it was pretty
Totally.
yuck.
Well, good for you for turning it around and
Yep.
making it the best out of it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Probably wouldn't be having this discussion if that didn't happen to you.
Not a chance.
Yeah.
Not a chance.
Cool.
And I'm very grateful for that, Jeremy, you know?
Yeah,
Like, I'm
absolutely.
grateful that I can have these kind of conversations, and I'm certainly grateful for the work that we do. Like,
Yeah.
and I often joke that if someone had come up to me right after the final of the Olympics, and I was walking my oar back up to the boathouse to put the boat away, and someone had come up and say, "Oh, don't worry, Jace. Someday you're going to be doing workshops that is all about this experience of losing."
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
I First of all, I likely would have punched them, but
Yeah.
there's just no way that it was on my radar. The notion of teaching coaches how to coach, inviting them to try on a different way of being. Like, I never saw that in the trajectory of my life.
Mm.
But the fact that I'm here, it's awesome, right? I love our work.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit more about your work? Is it yourself and your wife? Are you just
Yeah.
keynote speakers or?
Yeah, well, we do a little bit of everything. So
Yeah.
we do events where we'll do keynotes to organizations around our story and what we've learned and strategies and around high performance and that notion of the emotional influence on our ability to perform. But the workshop that we do, the high performance journey, it's a 4 or 5 day experience where we break it up into sections where we work with organizations and we invite people to really have a deep look at who they are being as individuals and how much that is either supporting or interfering their ability to conduct themselves and perform. So, it's built on the notion of awareness and the idea of connection and relationships and and entertaining the role that love has in our ability to perform, and then really tapping into that notion of joy, right? That play state where when we're in a state of joy, we are able to perform, and ultimately that's the end bit. We are able to perform at a higher level. Mm-hmm. So we invite people to consider that when we become better people, ourself, that the influence of that, the extension of that, is that we become better at everything that we do. So by taking care of ourselves, we then take care of everything that we're involved in, because we become, we hone ourselves into a state, an emotional state that is more aware, more connected, more loving, more joyful, and therefore more able to perform at a higher level. Mm-hmm. So we're not sort of an X and O's kind of workshop where you come and learn stuff, right? If I take this equation back to my workplace and employ it, right? Well, it'll result in this. This is a bigger kind of workshop. This is about an exploration of self and the role that self has in our ability to perform. So, it's highly interactive. It's, and yeah, we dig into some prickly stuff. We talk about ego, we talk about failure, we talk about the role of love, and those aren't always things that people want to talk about. But what I believe we do, and certainly what we've been told we do, is we create a very safe space. Mm-hmm. And the result of that is just some remarkable conversations where people share on a level that perhaps they never saw themselves sharing prior to coming into the workshop. Yeah. And then what comes out of that is people who see their work differently, right? And see themselves differently. They see their role differently as leaders, as team members. And certainly the feedback we get is that, people come out changed, evolved, right? They experience life on a different level. Cool. And that feels pretty cool.
Yeah, talk about service. That would be pretty fulfilling right there.
Yeah, it is incredibly fulfilling. Like it's I see it as an honor, quite honestly. Yeah. The trust that people come into that room with, that's a privilege. When people trust you on that level, that's a privilege. Yeah. And we don't take it lightly. So. Well.
Cool. Real quick, any books or anything that you would recommend that kind of, I know you've got your own book, so right. We can suggest those for sure.
Sure.
Any material, whether it be podcasts or anything that you, encourage people to listen to kind of understand like the nuances of all of this leadership technique?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. I just, for me, it's never one book. I always find it's always pieces and parts of, and it's certainly never one podcast. I find that I really get into, like Rich Roll, I enjoy, depending on who he brings on, I really enjoy some of the perspectives that get dug into with that. Mm-hmm. Oh goodness. They're just, I'm sort of all over the page, and I listen to podcasts when I work out, and And so, I'll sort of do a search for performance or mindset or even love. And, and that's more what I would encourage listeners to do, is to search for those key words and see what shows up. Even, not even, that sounds horrible, but I've listened to some remarkable interviews through Oprah, right? And this exploration of love and the exploration of ego. I mean, Eckhart Tolle, he may be kind of an out there kind of guy for a lot of people, and he certainly was for me for the longest time. Mm-hmm. But when I finally understood what he was talking about in terms of the role of ego, poof, I finally got, okay, that explains who I was at the Olympic Games, and why it was such an interference for me. So there are tons of resources out there. I just think, for me, it just becomes that journey of exploration, and one bit leads to another, and oh yeah, right. And it's interesting when you start looking for something, it starts showing up, right? It's kind of like that one headlight phenomenon. When one of your headlights is out, you start noticing other cars with their headlights out. Mm-hmm. The same is true of this. When you are now aware of this notion of wanting to understand the role of love, or the role of leadership, or the role of intrinsic motivation, it starts to show up because we're aware of it. And and you just sort of start, kind of popping your way through it. And that's certainly how it's been for me. It's not just one person that I get locked onto. Cool. I really like to delve into a multitude of individuals, and it's not always sport or business. It can show up in really different ways. Just there's documentaries. There's just so many resources nowadays. You could truly spend your entire day, and sometimes I do, just engulfed in the material of human and personal development.
Yeah. Beautiful thing how much access we have to all
that
information, isn't it?
Oh my goodness. Huge. But it's, the information's out there, and it's one thing to delve into it and to understand it. It's another thing to implement it, right? And at the end of the day, it does come down to work, to our engagement. When Robin gave me a book, Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, which is really about journaling, when I embrace the notion of journaling every single morning, which I still do today, all these years later, goodness, almost 30 years later, holy smokes, that was a tool of self-discovery, right? Because I began to write about stuff, and I began to understand who I was in those morning journaling sessions. So that was, if I'm going to put my finger on anything that began my journey, it was the notion of journaling and writing every morning about emotion and whatever. But the Artist's Way is a classic book in terms of starting that journey of self-discovery. I recommend it to all my clients, everyone I work with. So
I'm going to check that out. It's one of those things where, like, in terms of the self-development journey, you hear of a lot of techniques like meditation and cold showers and journaling, and it's interesting to me because you can know and hear a million times that it works for people, but implementing it into your own life, it kind of just needs to be the right timing and the right moment.
You bet. That's a great point, Jeremy. And it's true. And all of that stuff, like the journaling opened me up to the idea of meditation, which I resisted for years because I saw it as flaky and new age. And I do not meditate. In fact, I couldn't even use the word meditate when I began meditating.
Yeah.
I called it quiet time because that was safer for me. I didn't want anyone to know that I was meditating. Mm-hmm. But I took it on and I made it a practice. And I journaled this morning, I meditated this morning, and I had a cold shower this morning. So, to your point, all of these things come in as ideas and strategies and tools, but we come to them when we're ready. And that's what we come back to with our work. Robin used to say to me all the time when I was younger, people do the best they can with what they know. And so when people come to our workshop, we always tell people, look, it's not a light switch moment, right? It's not like you walk out of here and turn another part of you on. It begins a process of self-discovery and an evolution of continuously trying to evolve. I mean, I'm still in it. I haven't arrived. I've still got a crap load of work to do.
Yeah.
Right. And I totally understand that. And we all are evolving until the day we're done. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the cool part of life, is that there's no arrival point. There's no, oh, poof, I'm here. Right. We never get here. We continuously have the opportunity to develop who we are as a person. Mm-hmm. And for so long, and I think for many people still today, we hold the notion of personal development as some flaky new age ball of garbage that I will not step into. Mm-hmm. But again, that's ego, that's the story. And it was for me, I saw it as flaky, and I wasn't going to get into that world. But when I started understanding that it was just my ego writing a story that was interfering with my ability to be a better person, mm-hmm. and I started to try on new ways of being, new strategies, then I went, oh, whatever. I mean, I wish I had tried this decades ago, right? I wish I was meditating as a young athlete. I wish I was journaling as a young athlete. Yeah. Because I would have been a different athlete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like once you implement those healthy habits, that's the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, I wish I would have done this earlier.
Oh, yeah. Right. And that's the other part, is that even if I was hired by a school or a professional rowing club or a country, and they said, look, you can employ any strategy you want. Don't worry if don't be afraid of hurting any of your athletes, right? Mm-hmm. Even if I was allowed to go back to my old strategies of that fear dominance as a coach, I wouldn't, because it's not an effective strategy for high performance. Yeah. Right. So, but it took me a long time to realize that, but again, it's that notion of, oh man, if only I had known. Mm-hmm. I would have tried all of the things I do now, ages ago, and I would have been a different person, right? Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, well, might as well teach the next generation then, if you didn't know it when you were in your prime, right? Yeah. So good for you.
And I don't begrudge it. I mean, I trust it's happened the way it has, and that's all good. I don't, I don't sit around and feel sorry for myself. What happened, and I'm good with how it happened, and here we are, and I just get on with it, right?
Oh, cool. That's awesome. I think that's the perfect note to end on, Jason. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for chatting with me here.
My pleasure. I appreciate the conversation, and yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. That was awesome, man. Stop.